All right. So the next section that we are going to talk about for the Walking in Balance curriculum, like I mentioned, is respect. So um, we talked about sobriety in our last section. And so respect, this is kind of the topic that is maybe most kind of aligned with the stereotypes of Native Americans, right? I remember whenever I was young, and the TV was about to go off for the night, you would see that Indian with the one tear crying because somebody threw a piece of trash on the ground, or, I remember that whenever I was growing up. And so respect for your elders, right? That is what a lot of people think of when they think about Native American culture. And that's awesome. That is a really great stereotype that, hey, to perpetuate. Respect. So the teaching behind this says we aspire to always show respect to ourselves, others, and the environment. So Cherokee people place a high value on respect, not just Cherokee people. This is written from a Cherokee perspective because, of course, I'm Cherokee. But, we created this program so that it could be adapted to any different tribe, any different organization. That's what I really love about it, because our teachings, our values really are, a lot of them are universal. I've lived on a lot of different reservations, lived in a lot of different communities, Native and non-Native. And, our values, are, a lot of them are the same. And so in our youth, we are taught to respect elders because of the work they have done on our behalf and the knowledge that they keep. We are taught to respect ourselves by treating ourselves well and acting according to our values. And we are taught to respect others by treating them how they would like to be treated without judgment. Cherokee people also believe that we are only a small part of the earth, and we have a responsibility to care for the animals and the environment. Our survival depends on our ability to coexist in harmony and balance with the earth and the other beings on it. So respect for the environment is also very important. So, one thing I talk about a lot is, archaeologists, when it comes to Native American culture, they have a really hard time trying to document that. And to me, that's a point of pride. Our people lived in balance so well that you could barely find any evidence that we ever were there at all. And I just think that's awesome that we live with our environment and lived in balance, and such to the point that you could barely even tell that we were there. And that's really my goal. That my goal as I, walk this journey here on Earth is to, definitely reduce my footprint, but also leave the world a better place than I found it. Leave communities, leave families, leave people, in a better place than how I found it. So, in talking about, this teaching around respect, one of the components I feel like is talked about the least is respect for self. Yes, we know respect for elders. We know respect for others. We know respect for the environment, respect for the animals, right? Native people talk about that a lot. But it's really our respect for our own selves. I feel like that's not practiced as much. And so there are several variations of the definition of self-respect, but many include pride, confidence, dignity, and integrity. So for me, that meant defining who I am, right? We do not have a family crest with our values up on the wall. I didn't grow up like that. I didn't even know what our family values were to a certain extent. So for me, naming them really helped me to start this journey. Naming my values, writing them down. That way I knew right where my boundaries were. I knew what I will and will not do. And then respect for self also includes consuming only what is going to help me respect myself. So whether that's media, whether that's food, making sure I'm respecting myself in that way, and establishing boundaries, that serve my goals and serve my wellness. And so we talked about respect for others, as well as respect for the environment. So when it comes to respect, Dr. Barnes, would you like to share the supporting psychological knowledge behind it?
Yeah, so moving from imbalance to balance takes a lot of effort and dedication. So it's really important that you respect yourself enough to be able to put in that work and seeing yourself as worthy enough to make those changes. A lot of people do not show up for themselves because they don't see themselves as worthy of showing up for. If you don't have self-respect, you're probably not going to be very likely to try to help yourself. So developing self-respect involves identifying your strengths and being proud of yourself for them, as well as identifying your areas for growth and having self-compassion for them. It also means being able to forgive yourself for making mistakes and accepting your flaws. But keep in mind, though, that acceptance, people get hung up on this a lot. Acceptance does not mean being complacent about your areas for growth and no longer working to improve them. It means understanding how you got to where you are right now, making peace with that, and continuing to work towards your growth. A lot of people I've noticed when they're kind of trying to work towards a goal, they think it is counterproductive to that to be able to accept where they are right now, because I think we just have something programmed in us, right, that says I must reject all of the things that I don't like about myself and really hate them, and that is somehow gonna, get me towards my goal. It does not. So being able to balance both of those things. Self-respect also involves treating your mind and your body well and trying to take in what nourishes you instead of what is toxic to you, as well as standing up for yourself and setting healthy boundaries with others. Also, respecting yourself will increase your capacity to be able to show respect to others, because as within, so without. So this means treating people like Abraham talked about, how they want to be treated, and respecting their opinions and practices, even if they differ from yours. And as we all know now, our society is pretty bad at that. But it's not only the other humans that we need to respect to have a healthy society. It's also important to respect our planet, since it's what provides for us, and it's the only home that we have right now, I guess, until we colonize Mars. And respecting that the other life on the planet, whether they be plants, animals, what have you. For example, our horrific mistreatment of animals has very clearly backfired on us and has given given that many of the conventionally raised animal products have turned out to be carcinogenic and harmful to digestion and our liver, hormone regulation, and more. So remember that if our environment is unwell, we will be unwell. I like to say sometimes that it feels like, given the state of our water and our air and our food, all these things that we have to be around and consume, right, to stay alive. But the problems with all of them and the toxicity that's in them, we're kind of like swimming in a toxic fishbowl. And we need to be able to clean up our earth so that we can clean up ourselves, right? So practicing respect involves being able to identify and act according to our values, which is actually a major component of acceptance and commitment therapy, or what we call ACT. So ACT is an evidence-based therapeutic modality that we know that it helps with anxiety and stress and depression, substance use disorders, chronic pain, eating disorders, OCD, psychosis, and more. So if you're interested in learning more about ACT, which I highly recommend because it is very aligned with the principles that we're discussing in Walking in Balance, the founder of ACT, who is Dr. Stephen Hayes, he's written several books. And so for those of you that love reading, you can check out his more comprehensive book, which is called A Liberated Mind, The Essential Guide to ACT. And for those of you who don't love reading giant books, he has also written a more self-help workbook, which is a lot less overwhelming. And it's called Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life. And you can find both of those things on good old Amazon. So as far as the practical application goes, so again, I'll read through these and then we'll go back and talk about some of them. So the first one is, what are your strengths? So able to identify those. And I will tell you, as a mental health worker, we have to, when people come in for either assessments, for intake, stuff like that, one of the things that we have to ask is, what are your strengths, or sometimes they'll say weaknesses. I say areas for growth. People are really good at identifying their areas for growth. They are not good at identifying their weaknesses. Sometimes I have people that just stare at me and they'll eventually say, I don't know, I don't have any. And they do, but they can't identify them because they don't focus on them. So it's really important to be able to sit down and think about, what are my strengths? How can I give myself credit for that? Next is, what are some difficult things that you have survived and overcome in your life? That one may obviously be really hard to sit and think about, so give yourself time and space to be able to do that. How can you give yourself more credit for your strengths and what you've had to face in your life? What are your areas for growth, or the things that you would like to improve? When you examine your full context, meaning your upbringing, your societal pressures and influences, the physical and cognitive limitations that you have, or other forces working against you, how can you give yourself more compassion, more understanding, and more acceptance for your imperfections and your areas for growth? And then what are some ways that you can be more respectful to your fellow humans? How can you treat them how they want to be treated? What are some ways you can show more respect for other species and the planet? And what are your top 5 values? So do you embody these values in your everyday life? If not, how could you begin to? And going along with this, and you can find this stuff online if you need help with identifying values. There's a process within ACT, or a technique within ACT, is called a values card sort. And it's basically where we will have, usually we'll print out a lot of little cards and cut them up and then have people kind of physically do this, but you can look at lists online too. Either way is fine. But it's just looking at these big lists of values and being able to identify like your top 5. You don't have to be 5, you could pick another number, but at least your top 5 values, and then asking yourself, so these are important to me, but how much do I actually embody them? Like, for example, a lot of people say that their health really is important to them, but then when they look at their behaviors are not really aligning with that value. So being able to do that and ask yourself, well, okay, if I'm not aligning with my values in these ways, what are some steps I can take to start to act more in accordance with them? And the last point is being able to spend time around respectful people, because it is very hard to stay positive and respectful to yourself and others when you're constantly subjected to negativity and disrespect. What we consume influences our thoughts. So if we're hearing negativity and disrespect on a regular basis, we will likely find ourselves having that attitude as well. And I want to point out too that a lot of times there's not a whole lot we can do about who's in our surroundings, right? Especially if you're still, like, let's say someone's a minor and they're still a teenager, they're still living at home with their caregivers. I see that a lot in my practice. And so there's nothing they can do to escape that negativity, at least right then. Or maybe there's another situation that you have that makes it hard to not be around people that have that. It's really important, as much as you can, to be able to set aside time, alone time, and reflect on how the people around you and their energetic state is affecting you, and how you can, even if you can't physically remove yourself from that situation, always allowing yourself to mentally not attach to it and to not allow their words to become your own internal narrative. Another important part of that too is media. So if you're consuming a lot of negative media, which is kind of hard not to these days, that is going to impact your mental state. So just be really mindful of how much you're consuming there. So going back to some of the questions that would be good if y'all could answer in the chat, or what are your strengths and your areas for growth? And you can maybe name one each.
Yes, if you guys, that's the next question. If you want to go ahead and put it in the chat. Jim also had a comment before, whenever I was talking about, kind of them trying to find, evidence of our settlements a long time ago, that we were able to walk in balance and live in balance. He said, in our Haudenosaunee, sorry, I always mispronounce that, society, we moved our towns every 5 to 10 years so that the land could heal. That's exactly what I'm talking about. We're talking about walking in balance, right? I really love that. And so that's something I would like to, as much as we can, practice in our own lives. So, Sue, okay, so I will go first. What are my strengths? And Dr. Barnes, you're totally right. I can find my faults, list them probably into 100. But my strengths, when I first started this work, I couldn't find any. And so it did take a while, to be able to, start to see these things within myself. But once I started to see them, I started to feel them, which increased my confidence, my self-esteem. And so now I'm able to list them a lot. So some of my strengths, I am, I persevere. There are a lot of things that I have overcome that I am very proud of. One of my strengths is organizing. I'm a good organizer. I find that, always a lot of people turn to me when there's, kind of a job to be done. And I don't really take the lead, but I am really good at organizing the community, to get involved and, for us to get this thing accomplished. So I'm really proud of that. How about you, Dr. Barnes? What are some of your strengths?
Definitely, well, similar to what Sue and Jim are saying, being an empath, being very compassionate. I really love people and I really love this planet and animals. And I have found, unfortunately, that seems to be rare nowadays to really care about that stuff. So that's definitely one of my main strengths.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we're going to go through the chat really quick. So Sue says her strength is empathy. That is really awesome, and I really feel like empathy promotes balance in our society, in our homes, in our places of work, and because you do are able to connect with how other people are feeling and see things from their perspective. That's super awesome. Jim says, one of my strengths is I'm an empath. Can be a curse too if not balanced with having good boundaries. No, you're totally right, Jim. So Sue and Jim said the same thing about empathy and being an empath. And he talks about how that could be hard as well. Dr. Barnes, would you like to address that at all? Is that something you have come across in your work?
Yes, and also in my personal life for sure. Those of us who are highly empathic, like you said, it's a beautiful gift that we have hearts like that and that we really care about others, because there's a lot of people that do not. At the same time, that means that we can often take on like the emotional burden of things that we don't have control over, right? So we're going to talk about this a little bit more later in a different section also, but it's being able to find that boundary between being able to see what impact we can make and act on that empathy and do what we can, but also being able to take the weight of the world off of our shoulders and say, I cannot help everybody and everything all the time. I have to make sure that I'm filling up my own cup, not giving too much of myself. And then the excess that I have, I can then give to other people and the planet and animals and whatnot. So, but we are kind of, especially those of us who are really loving, sometimes we get taken advantage of. And so people and things ask too much from us and we're really kind. And so we just say yes to everything, right? It is okay to say no. That just no is a complete sentence. So
that was a struggle for me. I would say no and then think I had to make up a really, really good excuse. And where I could just say, hey, you know what? I'm sorry I can't make it. I hope you guys have a great time. You're right. There's so much power in that. That's been so helpful for me to learn how to say no. I'm a recovering people pleaser. So yeah. That is something I definitely continue to work on. But yes, very helpful. Geneva said one of her strengths is to be there for her family. That is definitely a strength. And, I was talking yesterday about, we hear a lot about historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, but I want to definitely highlight our intergenerational healing as well. And the work that you guys are doing with your families, the work that you're doing on yourselves, I think is amazing. And it's going to have repercussions in your family for years to come. So that is so awesome. Sue said that she totally agrees with Jim. It's exhausting being an empath because you are always feeling what others are feeling. No, I totally hear you, Sue, and definitely hope that you guys are able to, fill your own cup first, and make sure that you are giving yourself permission to rest and have that time for yourself. Katrina says that she's a good leader and advocate. That is a really good combination. Cherokees, we really believe in servant leadership, and being an advocate for others is extremely important, in many different arenas, right? I know that growing up, I was taught not to talk back to your doctor, not to question your doctor, but by helping others advocate for themselves in, medical setting, in a law enforcement setting, in an educational setting, right? That's definitely beneficial. So thank you guys so much. And
okay, Abraham.
Yes.
I just wanted to address Sue's comment there really quick, because that's another part of the difficulty with being an empath is we do like energetically interact and are very a lot more influenced by others' energetic or emotional states.
Mhm.
And it's really cool when you think about the mechanism behind how that works, right? So like from a neuroscience perspective, we have these things called mirror neurons, and they allow us to mirror, right, the state that other people are in. So we see their facial expressions, their emotional expression, we can tell kind of the state that they're in, and then we start to unconsciously mirror that. It kind of takes over us. And if you think about it from an energetic perspective, we all learned this in like 6th grade science, and then we kind of moved on and didn't really think too deeply about what it meant, but we are all energy. That's all it is. That's all at the door. All this stuff you see behind me is energy. It's actually moving so quickly or so slowly in some cases that we can't, it looks like it's solid, but it's really not. So we have this energetic space within and around us. And our energetic states literally come in contact with each other, especially when we're in close proximity to people that are suffering, which is why it's so hard sometimes to be a therapist or anybody that is working directly with people, because the energetic state they are in is then interacting with our energetic field. And so it then comes into us, and it's hard for us to be aware of that in the moment. And then sometimes like I will start to feel anxious when I'm with somebody, and I have to step back and go, is this my anxiety or your anxiety? Right. So if that's the case for you, now some people are cut off from this and they can't feel it, but for people that are highly empathic, we have a strong degree of this. So that's when you start to notice that you're taking on the emotions of somebody else to be able to give as much as you can, give yourself a physical break, re-regulate, do heart brain coherence, something of that nature, and go, what is mine and what am I taking on from them? That doesn't mean that I have to cut myself off and be like, well, I'm not going to help you because I don't want to feel your stuff, but it allows you to have better boundaries within yourself and not take on something that's not yours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly right. And for me, that's something that I've done a lot of work with, is those boundaries. So you talked before about, spending time with respectful people. If I am around people who are really negative, it brings me down. It is really hard to keep myself in a positive frame of mind and, feel good and everything when I am surrounded by negativity, by all of these things. And that's why we talk about not everybody is on this wellness journey, and that is totally okay. Cherokees believe everybody's journey is different and sacred, but different for a reason. They have to go through what they have to go through for a reason, right? And so, but it doesn't mean that we have to go through that with them. So I definitely set a lot of boundaries. There are people in my life with they will just argue with you to point out the negative, and it's really just to drag on my energy. So like you said, Dr. Barnes, you can't always choose who, you're around, but you definitely can set those boundaries so we can limit that time. But just wanted to mention that. Thank you so much. Loretta said, one of her strengths is not giving up. Keep going. That is awesome, Loretta. Thank you so much for sharing. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the perseverance section here in a bit. So Jim said, I pick up on energy that's out there in the world. I think this is why John Trudell said, protect your spirit, because you are in the place where spirits get eaten. Whenever I was writing the book, Walking in Balance, I actually almost put that quote in there under the spiritual section. And maybe I will actually, now that I think about it, I'm going to in the second edition, because you're right. Our society, the way it's built right now, and the reason why it is a little bit of garbage is because it is not, it can eat your spirit. It can kind of really chip away at that part of you. And that's when we see all of these chronic illnesses, anxiety, overstress, and everything, right? So thank you so much, Jim. That's actually John Trudell is one of my heroes. And so, that's really awesome that you shared that. I really appreciate it. Angel says, a strength I have is great leadership skills and the ability to be empathetic to others. That is so awesome. Thank you guys so much for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Dr. Barnes, I managed to get us over time again. So do you have any closing thoughts? I know we weren't able to get to the other question, but would you like to address anything else before we wind this section up?
I think that's pretty much it. Just when you're on your own time, really sit and think about you know, like, because the other question we're going to get to is what are your areas for growth, things you want to improve. But notice if you can, when you're answering these questions, like we were talking about earlier, is it easier for you to identify your areas for growth and strengths? And if so, is there maybe some inner critic stuff going on there that you can be able to sort through and ask it, why is it hard for you to tell me the good things about me? You know, just do this kind of self-reflection. But a lot of these questions are really helpful to be able to see yourself in a more holistic and balanced light rather than just negative.
And that's really what the goal is for Walking Balance. One of the goals. I've been practicing this stuff for 8 years now. You know, and so I wrote this. I didn't actually write the program, but I created the program a long time ago. And so I did this for my own wellness. That's why I started doing these things. And so it is because that inner critic was driving me mad. I was so tired of listening to that negative inner voice all the time. So all of this work that I do, the positive affirmations, the gratitude list, my what went well list, all of this work, my inner critic is quieter now than it used to be. And so, like I said, I will still have a negative, you know, automatic reaction a lot, but I can catch those thoughts now and turn them to positive and listen more to my inner cheerleader. And so while we're not perfect by any means, but it's gotten a lot better. I will just tell you, it really is worth the work. Thank you guys so much. And thank you, Dr. Barnes. I really appreciate it. So, and that is it. That wraps up our section on respect.